So I want to welcome Mikael. He's going to talk about the investor trends and, well, looking forward to it.
Yeah, thank you. Good morning. And this works? It does. Yes, I'll tell you a little bit about investor trends. We heard some of the input now from the private equity sector. I'll talk a little bit about what happened in the UK, but then also take a case and go up in Northern Europe to see what happens there. I am a partner with James, whom you've at least heard, also seen, in Think Hospitality. We are a London-based advisory firm working with hospitality groups around the world, really, mostly on strategy and growth issues and revenue growth. We have collective experience from around the world, so I think that we can draw some of the examples from there into what we do. We are really a collective of leaders. We're not a traditional consulting firm with a hierarchy of associates and so on. And apart from advising firms, we also put our money where our mouth is. We have a few investments and equity stakes in startup businesses. And this is one here is, for instance, a really good doner kebab shop in Leeds. We now have two, so it's actually officially a chain. And as you can see, they're really delicious. Now, what I'll talk about here is investor trends in UK and in Europe, and we just heard about the private equity part of it. I think that has traditionally, when we've been here to GRIF, been sort of the holy grail. How do you attract private equity investors? But what we also see is that there is a number of other options out there if you want to raise capital for your business. And we'll talk about some of these, how they're developing. But I think that also when just reflecting on some of the discussion that was here yesterday and when talking with people, I think that the one in the middle, the non-traditional growth strategy, I think that I'll just have a couple of minutes on that. Because I think that there's a lot of opportunities coming out now increasingly for non-capital intensive growth strategies. Dark kitchens, the whole new and growing interest from retailers and retail developers, shopping center developers in having a food and beverage component, and hotels that are looking to have outsourced new concepts into their hotels to develop their brand and attract a new crowd of guests. All this gives you, as if you're an entrepreneur, an opportunity to go out there and grow without the same kind of capital requirements as you probably would have had a few years ago. And it is worth exploring because I think that with the uncertainty of the sector and the cost pressures and what have you, going out there without a huge capital base, whether it's equity or debt, is a really big strength when you run into trouble, as most people do at some point. So, with this in mind, let's first look at the UK. The UK is really the big beast in the restaurant sector here in Europe when it comes to investments, and we've seen in the last few years here that the relationship has really been quite complicated between investors and restaurateurs. The first GRIF I was at about 3 or 4 years ago, it was boom times. Everybody was just rushing in. There was a lot more also non-traditional investors in the room looking how do we get into the restaurant sector. A lot of the topics were about exactly that. How to do that. Since then, we've had a number of negative stories in the UK. Chains that had attracted quite a bit of money and grown and failed one way or the other. On the other hand, we still have a lot of positive stories. We have Wagamama, we have Costa, we had beside these, we also have a lot of others that still indicate that there is money out there is interest in the sector, there are people, mostly American, it seems, firms that are coming in to spend money in the sector. There are a couple of also examples of sort of more untraditional funding strategies. Brewdock, I think most people probably know. Gary Usher here on the right-hand side is one of the most successful crowdfunding restaurateurs, having crowdfunded 5 venues, but also they do it without issuing equity, which I think is quite clever. So they pretty much pre-sell their restaurant seats so that they build up the hype, they build up the community, and they secure the business in the first month until they get up and running. So he's been very good at that. Moving from the UK to Europe, and these two, UK and Europe, are very soon apart, but we're not going to speak about that today. In Europe, there have also been a few high-profile investment deals, but not that many, and they tend to be less in the news than what we see with the big UK ones. We've seen in Italy, Rosso Pomodoro. We've seen in Spain, El Carton has invested in a chain there, and we see also in Scandinavia, in Finland and in Sweden, some high-profile investments there. Also in Germany, Nordsee is a very big chain of fish-based outlets, and also the Tim Aquino in Italy. Now, you also had, of course, a few years ago, I think by now, Vapiano going public. One of the few big IPOs within the sector in continental Europe. But going from there, I would like to hone more into the Northern Europe, to Scandinavia. And Scandinavia is these 5 countries: Denmark, Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Iceland. But primarily the 3, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, have the same language, very much similar systems, very much the similar culture. It's about 22 million people, so taken together, it's a sizable market, if not a big one. It's fairly educated, fairly sophisticated, fairly affluent, at least some of us. I'm still working on it. And then English speaking, and also it has good infrastructure. So I think that for lots of people coming from outside these countries, they find it easy to operate within the Scandinavian markets. It's also been a region that has undergone tremendous change in the restaurant sector over the last decade and a half. Pre-2003, it wasn't really worth talking about from a gastronomical point of view. Local restaurants, not very professional, no groups. Wasn't really worth visiting the countries for their gastronomy. 2003, Noma opened. Noma is a restaurant in Copenhagen, voted number 1 in the world 4 times in a row, and has transformed completely together with the new Nordic food movement that is focused on taking local ingredients and celebrating them, has transformed completely the culinary landscape of Scandinavia. And now you see that there's a very professional, very vibrant sector. There's a lot of interesting new concepts. We saw that here in Amsterdam too, so it's not something that is only seen in Scandinavia. But if you've seen a few concepts here in Amsterdam, you'll probably also find the same kind of new things in some of the Scandinavian capitals. It has also attracted professional interest, professional investor interest. And I'll take you through a couple of cases and then a little more overview after that. If you live in London, you might have run into Sticks and Sushi. It's a sushi restaurant, funnily enough. They say it's sushi for people who don't like fish. They are a very, very design-driven, concept-driven restaurant. They take a long time to go out and develop new sites. They have the same architect that they have had since, say, '95 to go in and help build the right kind of infrastructure. So each restaurant is slightly different from the others, but all in the same family, as we also heard yesterday with Italy. So you can see that they have they're very much the same. They have the same infrastructure and so forth, but they look different. If you look at the below right corner, Joe and the Juice, you probably also run into that somewhere. They have been one of the biggest successes coming out of Denmark, at least from a growth perspective, now having about 300 stores around the world, and are really expanding rapidly. They serve juice. You say, well, why? How can you build a chain on that? But they also do it with a very careful casting of their team members, mostly young guys with tattoos and an attitude that brings in the female crowd, that brings in the men, and that actually works. So they have gone from strength to strength. Top right-hand corner, Mikkeller. Mikkeller is a special case because it's really a brewery without a brewery that then later came into running their own bars. Now have about 40 bars and restaurants around the world, all owned and operated, mostly, if the local laws permit it. They are very good at branding. They have created a followership with their beers, where people line up to buy the newest editions. I'm actually sitting on another board of directors with the owner, and he says that he can actually put together a recipe for a beer while he waits for the potatoes to boil. I mean, he's done that 1,000 times. So they have a lot of change in special editions, some beers that will only be produced in a batch. So their customers line up to buy them because it's limited. What they also did was that say, well, a lot of people are interested in running, so they actually have the world's biggest running club, where people come to their bars, they meet, they go for a run, and they come back and drink a beer. So they're very good at engaging their customers and guests, and create a community around that. And we also see that the kind of investors they have attracted are very different. Sticks and Sushi, very slow, very not necessarily slow, but very careful growth, and they have a sort of traditional Danish private equity investor. Joe and the Juice have a couple of American investors, international investors, who can help him grow rapidly across the world. And Mikkeller has a non-traditional private equity investor, sort of media and entertainment investor, rather than somebody from the restaurant sector. So really carefully, also to your question before here, how do you choose the right investor? That is also somebody that matches the strategy and philosophy that you have as a business. Now, taking an overview here, that since 2013, which is quite recently, there's been quite a lot of interest in this is the Danish restaurant scene, with a lot of private equity investors coming in to discover the firm, mostly Danish, but also international firms. There's been a few secondary offerings yet, but not very much. There are no IPOs yet. So I think this is quite a recent development, and I think that it also shows the breadth of the investments. Now, what do they do? Lots of them, of course, is seeking money for growth. And as we also heard yesterday that the most attractive market for growth, at least among the bigger ones, is still the UK. So a lot of these will try to get into the English market, to London, before they go out to somewhere else. But a lot of them actually have a lot of growth opportunities still within the Scandinavian markets, and that's where they're looking to get both the investment and the support from their investors. Just briefly, 3 other concepts. Claus was taken over by a Finnish restaurant group. So that's a trade investment. Rolling that out. Up top right-hand corner, Ole & Steen have 90 bakeries and cafes in Denmark, and now a handful in London, and opened the first one in New York a few weeks ago. So they're trying to go the traditional international route. And the bottom right-hand corner, Gorm's Pizza, is sort of an artisan pizza group in Copenhagen, was taken over by a Norwegian group called Orkla. So that's again an industrial buy, and then they will roll out in Copenhagen and Denmark, I think, before they probably go on to Scandinavia before going out in the world. There are some learnings from this. I mean, I think first of all, it is, as an investor, there are opportunities outside the UK. There are opportunities to find maybe hidden gems or local heroes that have also an international opportunity. But I think you should expect the markets and the players to be less ready to meet the investors and less transparent when it comes to the whole business model, and haven't really thought through the same way as you'll find hospitality entrepreneurs primarily in the UK market. I mean, I think that in the UK you find that restaurateurs think about growth, think about taking in investors from a very, very early stage, and you won't find exactly the same in the smaller markets. You also find investors with less sector experience, and also you don't really have the same experience with investors. So restaurateurs don't quite know what to expect from them and what to ask. I think there's a less professional thoroughness in the preparation. So you'll find you'll need to work more with them to get into the core of what the business is. Of course, there's a question of concept valuation. It might work in a small market. Does it also work outside that? And I think this is where you can bring something to the table as an investor. I think that there might be unexpected barriers from local legislation. I think there's always this risk if you go into another market that you don't quite know what you expect there. You probably need to navigate in a local little club where everybody knows each other. And there are 5 million people in Denmark. I mean, chances are that investors and successful entrepreneurs will know each other or be in the same circles. So you need to break into that if you come from the outside. Not that it's difficult, but you'll have to think a way to do that. And of course, there will be more limited IPO opportunities because the whole capital market isn't as developed as for instance, in the UK. So that's more or less what I have. There is opportunity outside the UK. The UK is complicated, but so is this market here. I think a lot of traditional PE investors have probably burned their fingers a little bit, have found out that this isn't as easy as they thought. It isn't quite the same as when you invest in a more traditional industrial company. So I think that'll be an issue. But I think that also the restaurateurs and the entrepreneurs in these markets are much more aware of the opportunities from internationalization, and it is an opportunity today that didn't quite exist a few years ago, and isn't really on the radar screen for a lot of for a lot of entrepreneurs, but it is getting there, and I think it's an opportunity for both the entrepreneurs and the investors to utilize the opportunities for this. Thank you. Any questions? No? Grab me afterwards if you have any questions, otherwise I'll get on to the next one.